Don't waste our time. A woman could never make that shot. The commander's words cut like steel, dripping with absolute certainty. For days, Aria Navarro had endured the smirks, the dismissals, the quiet laughter that told her she didn't belong. Yet here she was, the only one still standing between the world and annihilation. Her breath slowed, her hands steady, her resolve unshaken. The world had less than 30 seconds before nuclear war began. Commanders had failed. Soldiers were pinned down, and in that silence, one woman, the sniper they dismissed as unworthy, whispered into her radio, "Target acquired." At 7,000 meters, even the Earth's rotation threatened to betray her. But in this moment, Aria Navarro wasn't just aiming at a man, she was aiming at history itself. The story of Aria Navarro did not begin on a battlefield or in a military academy. It began in the rugged silence of the New Mexico mountains, where the desert winds whispered across jagged rocks and endless skies seemed to stretch into infinity. Aria grew up in a place where stillness was not emptiness, but a teacher, where every gust of wind, every flicker of shadow carried a lesson for those who had the patience to listen. Her father, Colonel Rafael Navarro, a retired Army sniper with a chest full of commendations and scars that no metal could measure, believed the mountains were the best classroom for raising his only daughter. While most children her age learned multiplication tables and playground games, Aria was being taught how to read the subtle language of wind and distance. Her father would place an empty tin can on a boulder 200 yards away and tell her, "Don't just see the can, Aria. Feel everything between you and it." At first, she thought it was nonsense. But under his guidance, she realized what he meant. How the wind curled around rocks. How heat shimmered in the distance. How the silence carried its own kind of sound. Rafael Navarro was not an easy teacher. He believed discipline was the foundation of freedom. Every Saturday morning before the sun broke over the horizon, he would wake her with a firm knock on the door and a single command: "Mountains, now." Aria would groan and stumble into her boots, but once she was standing in the cool dawn air, with the mountains painted in hues of pink and gold, she understood why her father insisted. Precision, he said, was not about the rifle. It was about the mind. By the time she was 12, Aria could calculate bullet drop with nothing but a stick in the dirt at her feet. Her father made her learn equations, not as numbers in a book, but as tools that lived in her bones. He would quiz her relentlessly. "At 500 yards, what's your drop? At 800, what's the drift with a 5-mile-an-hour crosswind? Temperatures at 90 degrees, what changes?" She would answer, sometimes with hesitation, sometimes with confidence, but always learning that mathematics was not confined to classrooms. It was survival written in numbers. Her childhood was not typical. Other kids spent weekends at malls. Aria spent them crawling through brush, learning how to move without disturbing a single blade of grass. Other girls practiced makeup tutorials. She learned how to blend into shadows and remain unseen for hours at a time. Raphael never forced this life on her. He simply lived it with such conviction that she wanted to follow. There were days, however, when she resented it. She would sit on a rock, rifle across her lap, and mutter, "Why me, Dad? Why not just let me be normal?" He would look at her with eyes that carried both love and burden. "Because, Aria, the world doesn't care about normal. One day being ready will matter more than fitting in." That statement stayed with her long after the echoes of their practice shots faded into the mountains. In her heart, she began to realize that her father wasn't just training her to shoot. He was preparing her to carry a weight few people ever had to bear. What strikes us about Aria's upbringing is not just the harshness of the training, but the ordinariness of the environment. A child, a father, and the mountains, nothing more. And yet from these simple elements came a skill set that would one day alter the course of history. This reminds us that greatness often doesn't emerge from polished academies or glittering facilities. It is born in backyards and forgotten hills, in the quiet dedication of a parent who refuses to let potential go untapped. Aria Navarro's story shows that extraordinary talent is rarely born in extraordinary places. More often, it begins in the overlooked corners of ordinary life. When we look at our own lives, how often do we dismiss the mundane? How often do we assume that greatness needs glamour, when in reality it needs grit? Aria's mountains were no different from ours. ordinary landscapes, easily ignored. Yet within them she learned patience, resilience, and calculation. The tools that would one day save nations were first sharpened on rocks, dust, and desert wind. At 18, Aria Navarro made the decision that would forever define her path. The desert mountains of New Mexico had been her training ground, but the army would become her crucible. She enlisted with the quiet resolve of someone who had already lived years in preparation. Her father's lessons, mathematics scrawled in dirt, patience stalking through brush, and hours of controlling her breathing, were about to be tested in an institution that thrived on uniformity and tradition. From the very beginning, Aria stood out. During her initial marksmanship qualifications, drill instructors noticed the way she handled her rifle, not with the rushed eagerness of recruits trying to impress, but with the calm precision of a surgeon. When she pulled the trigger, her shots landed dead center, one after another with a consistency that silenced even the loudest skeptics. By the end of basic training, she had broken records in long-range accuracy, hitting targets at distances that most soldiers considered impossible. This earned her a recommendation to sniper school, an honor rarely given, especially to a young woman. The military's culture, steeped in decades of male-dominated combat roles, wasn't ready to accept her so easily. Instructors muttered under their breath, and some fellow trainees scoffed openly. "She's good on the range," one soldier sneered, "but in the field, she'll fold." Others laughed at her meticulous notes, her constant calculations, her habit of recording wind speed, temperature, and humidity before every shot. To them, it looked obsessive, too academic, too detached from the chaos of real combat. But Aria didn't argue. She let the rifle speak for her. During one grueling exercise, instructors set up a series of targets at progressively longer distances, ending with one more than 2,000 meters away, in extreme range for training. One by one, recruits failed, their bullets landing wide of the mark. When her turn came, Aria lay prone, adjusted her scope, and ran through the calculations in her head as naturally as breathing. Wind direction, air density, bullet drop, all of it played out like an equation she had solved 1,000 times in the mountains with her father. She pulled the trigger. A second later, the distant target rang with a perfect hit. Silence followed, broken only by the instructor muttering, "Navarro, that's a new record." Still, not everyone celebrated her success. Some whispered that she was lucky, that she had memorized conditions in advance. Others argued she was too slow, too deliberate. In their minds, snipers were meant to be decisive hunters, not mathematicians behind a rifle. Her very strength, her methodical, scientific approach, was used as evidence that she didn't fit the mold. This resistance became a theme of her early military career. Time and again, she proved herself in skill and discipline, but the doubts never fully vanished. The idea that a woman could be among the best snipers in the Army was simply too disruptive for some to accept. Even when her performance was undeniable, the undercurrent of skepticism lingered, and yet every barrier only hardened her resolve. Aria learned to let the criticism roll off her shoulders, just as she had learned to let the wind roll past a bullet. She stopped trying to prove she belonged and focused instead on excelling so completely that belonging became irrelevant. Aria's struggles reveal a truth about the military and institutions in general. Tradition resists change. Even as she broke records, her precision and scientific approach were met with skepticism. This is a broader human pattern. We cling to the familiar, dismissing innovation as impractical until necessity proves otherwise. Aria's story is not only about gender, but about the clash between convention and progress. Her methodical style was mocked as overthinking, yet it was exactly what set her apart. Greatness isn't just breaking records, it's enduring doubt and holding firm to the path you know is right, even when others cannot see it yet. Aria Navarro's first combat deployment came in Iraq, where the desert heat pressed down like an unrelenting weight, and the chaos of urban warfare tested even the most seasoned operators. For a 20-year-old sniper, it was a proving ground harsher than any range or school. Here, mistakes weren't marked in red ink or lecture notes. They were paid for in blood. Her unit had been sent to support a joint task force tasked with extracting intelligence officers trapped in a hostile neighborhood in Mosul. Streets were narrow, Rooftops bristled with enemy lookouts, and insurgents had fortified intersections with heavy machine guns. Conventional movement was impossible. Every turn could be an ambush, every shadow a rifle. The mission needed an Overwatch sniper, but not just an ordinary one. It needed someone who could see further, react faster, and adapt to an environment that defied textbook tactics. That was when Aria first earned the name Wraith. From her concealed position on the roof of a crumbling apartment block, she blended so seamlessly into the dust and concrete that enemies never saw her coming. Her shots came without warning, precise and surgical. When insurgents scanned for the source of fire, there was nothing. Only whispers among her teammates that she was a ghost on the battlefield. After the mission, soldiers began calling her Wraith because, as one sergeant put it, she's there, but you'll never see her until it's too late. But Aria's reputation wasn't built solely on stealth. What set her apart was the way she redefined long-range shooting in combat. Standard sniper doctrine emphasized engagements under 1,000 meters for reliability. Anything beyond was considered impractical in dynamic combat zones. Yet Aria consistently pushed beyond those limits. She brought the mathematical rigor her father had drilled into her and adapted it to the battlefield. In Mosul, she made a shot across nearly 2,400 meters, through layers of shifting wind and heat distortion rising from the streets. The bullet passed between two half-collapsed walls and struck an insurgent spotter preparing to call out the team's position. The extraction team later said that shot saved their lives. To Aria, it wasn't luck. It was calculation, patience, and trust in her process. Not everyone approved. Some commanders whispered that she was reckless, relying too much on untested theories. One instructor back at sniper school even dismissed her reports. These aren't tactics, they're experiments. But word of her successes spread quickly. Soldiers who had once doubted her now leaned on her Overwatch with a faith that bordered on reverence. Her innovative techniques soon gained attention beyond the battlefield. Aria began compiling detailed logs of her shots, noting variables most snipers ignored. Microclimates between rooftops, humidity shifts caused by nearby rivers, even how heat from burning vehicles distorted trajectories. These records, once laughed at as obsessive, became resources studied by instructors in sniper programs. It wasn't long before military journals began referencing her case studies. They highlighted her approach as evidence that extreme long-range shooting was not just theoretical, but operationally viable. For the first time, commanders began to acknowledge that the boundaries of sniper doctrine might need to expand. Still, the skepticism never fully disappeared. Many in the old guard dismissed her work as an outlier, exceptional only because of her personal talent, not something that could be taught or standardized. And perhaps that was true. Innovation often begins with individuals so committed to their vision that others mistake them for anomalies. Aria's rise in Iraq revealed a powerful truth. Innovation often comes from those considered different. She was doubted for being too precise, too mathematical, too methodical, but those very traits let her see possibilities others ignored. This isn't just a military lesson, it's a human one. History is filled with innovators once dismissed as impractical or reckless, until their ideas reshaped what was possible. Aria Navarro belongs to that lineage. Her call sign, Wraith, spoke not only to how enemies never saw her, but also how her peers overlooked her. Yet unseen and underestimated, she reshaped doctrine with results, not permission. Her story reminds us that the qualities others criticize may be the very ones that change the world. The intelligence briefing room was tense, its walls glowing with the cold light of satellite imagery. On the screen was a heavily fortified facility buried in a valley in Central Asia. Concrete bunkers, missile silos, and defense systems designed to repel any assault. Inside, analysts said, was Dr. Anton Volkov, a rogue scientist once tied to a Soviet weapons program. Now he was working with extremists, preparing to launch a nuclear strike that could trigger retaliation from world powers. The clock was ticking. At the head of the table stood Commander Lucas Trent, a man whose very posture spoke of tradition. Square jaw, cropped silver hair, and a chest decorated with ribbons from 2 decades of service, Trent was the embodiment of the old-school Navy SEAL ethos. His leadership style had been forged in raids and firefights, where brute force and aggressive tactics carried the day. He respected courage and toughness above all else. Innovation, in his eyes, was often just a fancy word for unreliability. The mission was simple in theory, but nearly impossible in practice. One shot from more than 7,000 meters away, farther than any recorded combat kill in history. Anything closer would be detected by Volkov's advanced air defense systems. Only a sniper could prevent the launch, but it would take someone with an almost supernatural grasp of ballistics, patience, and nerves of steel. Trent looked around the room, scanning the faces of his men. When his gaze landed on Sergeant Mason Cole, his chosen marksman, he gave a sharp nod. Cole was competent, steady under fire, and most importantly, a SEAL. To Trent, that title outweighed any record book. Aria Navarro sat quietly at the back, her hands folded around a notepad filled with calculations she had already begun running. She knew shots beyond 3,000 meters were rare. 7,000 bordered on the impossible. Yet she also knew that she had spent her entire life preparing for moments exactly like this. Moments when calculation, patience, and precision mattered more than brute strength. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I've logged hits at over 3,200 meters in combat. I've been developing environmental models that could make a 7,000-meter shot feasible. I believe I should at least be considered." The room went silent. Several younger soldiers glanced at each other, curious to see how Trent would respond. The commander's lips curled into something between a smirk and a frown. "Navarro, this isn't about lab work or your notebooks full of theories. This is combat. It's about toughness under pressure. You're a fine marksman, but this mission requires a SEAL, someone who's proven in our way of doing things. We don't gamble the fate of the world on an experiment." The words stung, not because they were loud, but because of the certainty with which they were delivered. To Trent, her gender and her unconventional style made her unfit for the task. In his worldview, reliability meant tradition, and tradition meant men like Mason Cole. Aria said nothing more. She had learned long ago that in moments like these, arguing only hardened the wall of doubt. But inside, she felt a cold clarity. Trent was willing to risk billions of lives by ignoring the one person most qualified to attempt the shot. It was not malice. It was bias disguised as confidence. As the briefing ended, soldiers filed out, murmuring about the mission. Some looked at Aria with sympathy, others with doubt, but none spoke up. In their world, commanders were rarely questioned. This moment shows a dangerous flaw in leadership. Bias disguised as certainty. Commander Trent was seasoned and respected, but his loyalty to tradition blinded him to reality. Believing he was protecting the mission by trusting someone tested, he instead ignored the one person best equipped to succeed. This isn't just a military lesson, it's universal. Leaders everywhere often dismiss the unconventional thinker in favor of the familiar. But comfort does not win wars, and bias can be costly. Aria's exclusion is a warning. When institutions prize tradition over ability, even brilliance can be overlooked, with consequences that may prove catastrophic. The days following the briefing were marked by frustration and failure. Commander Lucas Trent pushed his SEAL teams to attempt infiltration after infiltration. Each time, the outcome was the same. Volkov's defensive systems detected them long before they could get close. Anti-air batteries and ground surveillance forced retreats, and what began as confident momentum soon eroded into grim silence. Aria Navarro remained in her assigned supporting role, posted on a rocky ridge overlooking the valley. Officially, she was backup overwatch. Unofficially, she was running calculations every waking moment. With a weather kit at her side, she logged temperature changes by the hour, charted shifting wind patterns across the valley, and built detailed ballistic models that incorporated everything from humidity levels to barometric pressure. Her notebook became a battlefield of numbers and equations, angles, wind vectors, Coriolis effect, even minute gravitational variations at that altitude. To most, it looked like clutter. To Aria, it was clarity. Every variable was a threat, but also a puzzle piece. And if enough puzzle pieces were solved, the shot, unthinkable at 7,000 meters, might just become possible. Meanwhile, Trent grew restless. The mission clock was running out, and Volkov's men were seen moving fuel trucks toward the missile silos. Satellite intercepts confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The nuclear launch sequence was days, perhaps hours, from completion. The SEAL teams tried again, this time advancing through a narrow ravine under cover of night. Drones buzzed overhead, their faint glow betraying movement in the darkness. Volkov's radar picked them up within minutes. Mortar fire rained down, scattering the men. Injuries piled up. They pulled back once again. At dawn, the base camp was quiet except for the beeping of medical monitors and the low murmur of frustrated commanders. The legendary SEAL efficiency, built on decades of doctrine, had met its limit. Tradition had brought them here, but tradition could not carry them through. Aria, still seated on her ridge, tightened her scope on the facility. She could see technicians moving along catwalks, shadows shifting under floodlights. Every detail told her the truth. The missile was nearly armed, and she, the sniper they had dismissed as too theoretical, was the only one who might stop it. She reached for her radio. "Command, this is Navarro. My models show a possible shot window at 7,040 meters. Crosswinds are stable for the next 18 minutes. After that, conditions will deteriorate. Recommend authorizing engagement." The silence on the channel lasted too long. Finally, Trent's voice came through, heavy with irritation. "Negative, Navarro. We're not gambling on your math. My men will breach again tonight." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She went back to her notebook, refining equations, simulating wind drifts, accounting for temperature gradients. She wasn't simply preparing for a shot. She was preparing for history. Hours later, alarms sounded in the command tent. Satellite intel confirmed that Volkov had entered the launch control bunker. The countdown had begun. In less than 30 minutes, a nuclear warhead would be armed and launched. Panic rippled through the camp. Trent barked orders, mobilizing his battered SEALs for one final attempt. But deep down, even he knew they could not reach the bunker in time. The valley was a fortress, and his men were exhausted. For the first time, his voice carried not confidence, but desperation. From her ridge, Aria steadied her breathing. She had tracked every variable for days, memorized every gust of wind that passed through the valley. The models in her notebook weren't theories anymore. They were maps to survival. The radio crackled. Another officer, voice strained, cut through the chaos. "Commander, we need an option." "Any option?" Trent hesitated. His doctrine had failed. His men had failed. The clock was burning away seconds like dry leaves. And the woman he had dismissed was still there, waiting, her scope fixed on the only solution left. This act shows the direct clash between tradition and innovation. Commander Trent trusted proven methods in the SEAL's courage. But against Volkov's defenses, tradition hit a wall it could not cross. Aria's calculations, once dismissed as theory, were no gamble. They were preparation, and when time ran out, they became the only path forward. The lesson is clear. When familiar solutions fail, clinging to them is more dangerous than risk. Innovation often looks uncertain until it becomes the only option. And in that valley, innovation was not just a choice, it was survival. The command post was chaos. Radios crackled, alarms wailed, and every screen showed the same horror. The launch sequence had begun. Numbers glowed red, a countdown pulsing toward catastrophe. 20 minutes, then 15. And then, the voice no one wanted to hear, an intelligence officer shouted, "Final arming procedure confirmed. Less than 30 seconds to launch." On the ridge, Aria Navarro lay prone, her body pressed into the rocky earth, the rifle steady against her shoulder. Sweat gathered at her brow, but her hands were still. Around her, the wind shifted in gentle pulses she had tracked for days. The valley below looked calm, almost serene, belying the fact that it was seconds from igniting a nuclear war. Through her scope, she could see him, Dr. Viktor Mirov. The traitor scientist moved between the missile's control panel and the blast doors, flanked by technicians who scrambled with frantic speed. His hand reached for the final key switch. The radio burst alive with Commander Trent's desperate tone. "Navarro, can you take the shot?" Her reply was calm, almost too calm for the moment. "Target acquired." 20 seconds. She inhaled deeply, slowing her pulse. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't fight the wind, Aria. Dance with it. Feel its rhythm. Then release." Her eyes narrowed. At 7,000 meters, the shot wasn't just skill. It was science balanced on the edge of impossibility. Bullet drop measured in dozens of meters. Wind drift like an invisible river. Even the Earth's rotation threatened to push her round astray. She had factored it all. Every variable was already in her mind, layered like equations written on glass. 15 seconds. She exhaled slowly, her finger tightening on the trigger. Time seemed to dilate. The sound of chaos from the command post faded. The world narrowed to a single point, the crosshairs resting on Viktor Mirov's chest. 10 seconds. Her breathing stopped. Silence filled her. She squeezed. The rifle roared. The recoil kicked into her shoulder, but her body absorbed it, unmoving. The bullet spun into the air, cutting through layers of heat, dust, and shifting currents. For nearly 10 full seconds it flew, a speck of metal on a path most believed impossible. Below, Mirov's hand hovered over the final activation switch. His lips curled, as if savoring the moment of triumph. Then, without warning, he staggered. A neat hole bloomed in his chest. His hand fell inches short of the button. His body collapsed, lifeless, as the technicians froze in shock. The launch sequence halted. The numbers stopped at 0.5 seconds, frozen forever in red. On the ridge, Aria lowered her rifle. Her voice broke the silence across the radio. Target down. Nuclear strike prevented. For a moment, no one spoke. Then in the command post, relief burst like a flood. Shouts, gasps, the sound of men who realized they had just witnessed history. Even Commander Trent, the man who had doubted her, whispered in disbelief, "My God, she did it." But Aria did not celebrate. She remained on overwatch, scanning for secondary threats, her face calm. This was not triumph. It was responsibility fulfilled, the culmination of years of preparation, of nights alone in the mountains with her father's lessons, of being dismissed, mocked, underestimated. One bullet, one chance, and the world was still intact. In the final 20 seconds, the world saw that heroes don't emerge in comfort. They rise in crisis. Aria Navarro, once dismissed and doubted, proved that preparation and courage could halt annihilation. True heroism isn't about rank or recognition. It is clarity under pressure. Billions lived on, unaware their future had been saved by one woman lying on a ridge, aiming not at a man, but at history itself. 6 months after the shot that stopped the unthinkable, Aria Navarro stood on the White House lawn beneath a clear sky. Rows of soldiers in dress uniforms lined the stage. Cameras flashed, news anchors whispered, and across the world, millions watched live. The president stepped forward, holding a small blue box trimmed with gold. His voice carried across the crowd. For actions that prevented global catastrophe, for precision under pressure beyond imagination, Staff Sergeant Aria Navarro is awarded the Medal of Honor. Applause thundered as the ribbon was draped around her neck. For a moment, Aria bowed her head, eyes closed, not in pride but in quiet remembrance. She thought of the ridge in New Mexico, of her father's lessons whispered in mountain winds, and of the long years when people told her she didn't belong. Now the world knew otherwise, but medals, Aria believed, were symbols, not goals. Her true legacy began when she accepted a new assignment, instructor at the Army's sniper school. There, she trained a new generation, both men and women, teaching them that marksmanship was more than pulling a trigger. It was patience, mathematics, environmental awareness, and above all, responsibility. In her classroom, cadets leaned forward as she explained bullet drift equations with chalk on a board. On the range, they watched in awe as she adjusted their stances with a quiet hand and reminded them, "A true sniper doesn't fight the wind. You learn to move with it." For the first time in military history, female recruits entered sniper training without whispers of doubt following them. Commanders who once dismissed them now cited Aria Navarro's shot as proof that talent knows no gender. Her story became required reading in leadership courses, not just for her technical achievement, but for the lesson it carried about bias, courage, and trust. And Commander Lucas Trent, he never again questioned the value of unconventional voices. In lectures, he admitted that he had nearly cost the world everything by clinging to tradition. His confession became part of the case study. The danger of leadership blinded by prejudice. Aria's legacy is more than a record-breaking shot. It is a reminder that prejudice can destroy, But trust, given at the right moment, can save the world. For years, she carried the weight of doubt, underestimated because of her gender and her methods. Yet when the moment came, it was her preparation, her perspective, and her persistence that preserved billions of lives. Her story teaches us that innovation and inclusion are not just ideals, they are necessities. The voices we dismiss may one day hold the key to our survival. And so, Aria Navarro's story closes not just as a tale of war, but as a mirror for our own lives. In the quiet of that ridge, she showed us something universal. The people we underestimate may hold the answers when everything is on the line. Her precision was not just about ballistics, it was about discipline, patience, and the courage to act when others hesitated. Think about it. In our world today, how often do we dismiss someone because they seem too different, too quiet, or too unconventional? In workplaces, families, even communities, we sometimes cling to tradition, assuming that the old way is the safest way. But as Aria proved, when the stakes are highest, it's often innovation, humility, and persistence that save the day. For older generations listening now, her story may echo your own experiences, times when you were told you couldn't, yet you did. For younger viewers, it's a reminder that the world will always doubt before it believes. The question is, will you be ready when your moment arrives? So I ask you, what lesson do you take from Aria's journey? Do you believe tradition should always guide us? Or do you think innovation must lead when everything is at risk? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your perspective. Your voice might inspire someone else watching tonight. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it touched you, please give it a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of hidden courage, quiet resilience, and the human spirit that refuses to break. Because sometimes one story can change how we see the world, and maybe even how we live tomorrow.